All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast. Got a special treat for you guys today. I have had a chance to read a new book that's coming out here, The Last Folk Hero: The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson. I'm speaking to the author of the book today. Joining me is Jeff Pearlman. He's written a lot of sports, but he's written for Sports Illustrated. Jeff, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, and it's good to speak to someone, a guy from the old neck of the woods. I'm a mail pack guy. I sold cookies at the Jefferson Valley Mall. I took surveys at the Jefferson Valley Mall. I had my careers at the JV Mall.
Yeah. I remember the J Mall in a movie theater. That's so long ago.
Does it not have one anymore? Long gone. It's a dead mall now, right?
They actually have revived it pretty well. I mean, there's now an escape room in there. They have a new restaurant in there. Like they've done a job fixing it up.
Oh, that's good to hear. Because that was if you were growing up in mail pack in the 1980s, as you know, as we've discussed, not much to do in mail pack in the 1980s. The JV Mall, you'd wander around, you'd bring $10. They had a Burger King, a pizza joint, and you just roam the mall. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, they have a Cinnabon now. That tells you they're doing well.
Did not have a Cinnabon back in the day. Did not, but they did have a Burger King and a Friendly's ice cream place. So
yeah, a lot. Like I think a lot of fun with the JV Mall memories. Took about this book here, and the book is entitled, as I mentioned earlier here, The Last Folk Hero: The Life and Time and Myth of Bo Jackson here. And I want to start out here with a question, because obviously you've written a lot of books. You've written about the '86 Mets, several Laker dynasties, Brett Favre. What made you say, I want to do a book on Bo Jackson?
well, during those days in mail pack when I was growing up, like he was on my wall. Bo Jackson was on my wall. Ricky Henderson was on my wall. Don Mattingly was on my wall. Dwight Gooden was on my wall. And I'm very nostalgic. I'm very, very nostalgic. And when I was thinking about the next, but my last book was about the Shaq Kobe era Lakers. I really love writing about and diving into athletes who I grew up watching and appreciating. And even when I went to University of Delaware, I had two Bo Jackson posters hanging up. Like he was among my handful of favorite athletes. And I just think you read the book, like there's a real mystique to what could he have been? How many of these things people talk about actually happened? And where has he gone? And I just think those are good recipes for a book when you talk about an iconic figure like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you go through the book and you just look at all these different feats, like Bo Jackson when he's a kid. Like we had like minor league teammates telling how like he ran up walls, how to throw balls with the running track, like over the center field fence, and like a lot of stuff. Like, is it real? Is it not? Sort of as the myth of Bo.
And I'm kind of comfortable with both. Like I verify hard. I interviewed 720 people. I reported this thing super duper hard. But when you're talking about like, I haven't talked about this yet while promoting the book, but there was a game when he was playing in Memphis with the Chicks in the minor leagues in '86. And he's running toward a foul line, I think it's Charlotte, at the ballpark in Charlotte. And they have a chain separating the foul from fair territory, like a literal physical chain. And it's 5 feet high. And I had multiple teammates tell me Bo ran, caught the ball on a fly, like planted his feet, leapt over the 5-foot thing, turned around, flat foot, jumped over it again. Now, there's no video of that. Nobody was videotaping the Charlotte Memphis game back in '86. But I have witnesses, and sometimes you go with them. And even if stories like, there's a lot of tall tales with Bo Jackson. There are a lot of, that ball went 500 feet. No, it went 600 feet. You sort of there's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge for some of these things.
Absolutely. Here, you mentioned you interviewed 720 people. One of them was not Bo Jackson himself. I know you talked to Bo beforehand, and he basically gave you his blessing to do the book, but he did not interview to be interviewed for it. So here, so I understand you had a very creative way to get Bo Jackson's voice into the book.
I wouldn't say he gave me his blessing. I just want to say, to be clear, I don't want to misrepresent. He said, I'm fine with you doing it, which isn't the same as saying, good luck with it. I hope it goes great. He didn't stand in my way. I got really lucky. So he went to Auburn University in Alabama. And someone told me that when he wrote an autobiography in 1990, Bo Knows Bo, with a legendary journalist named Dick Schaap. And Dick Schaap has since passed. A lot of people might know the name because his son Jeremy is on ESPN. And when Dick Schaap died, before he died, he donated all his notes to the Auburn Library. And it wasn't just notes, it was the audio recordings of all his interviews he did with Bo. And I was able to pay Auburn's library, whatever, a nominal fee, and they sent me everything. And a lot of the interviews were never used before. A lot of the material was never used before. It didn't appear in his autobiography. And it was just mounds and mounds and mounds of information, of quotes, of fresh material. So I've told people it almost felt like having a conversation with 28-year-old Bo Jackson. It was invaluable.
Yeah, like how much material was there? Like how many like tapes did Dick Schaap donate to
Oh,
that library?
so they sent it to me on a file. So it wasn't actually the audio tapes anymore. It's all that converted. So I don't know how many tapes, but it was well, I'd say maybe 20
Yeah.
thick interview, because
Yeah.
what he did, Dick Schaap at the time they would do is maybe Dick would meet him in Kansas City before a game. They'd sit down and talk. He'd go to his house, a different session. They'd sit down and talk. They'd go out to eat at a diner. They'd sit down and talk. So it was all these different sporadic interviews with Bo Jackson. And it was him talking about stuff because he was very guarded with the media. It was stuff he usually wouldn't talk about. And some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff never made the book for one reason or another, but it made this book.
Yeah, it did make the book here. And I know obviously you were doing a lot of the prep for this book, like in the height of COVID. I know you talked about how it sort of changed your trajectory here. Like, what were some of the challenges you had with trying to write this book? Like when you're dealing with, oh, like travel, like restrictions, stuff like that. What was some of the big challenges you had to overcome writing this book?
Well, I mean, travel is number one by far.
Yeah.
Is I like going to scenes and I like knocking on doors and I like talking to people in person, not just because it's good reporting, because it's actually fun. And one of the reasons we do this is for the enjoyment and the dig. So that sucked. And I finally sort of toward the end of, when everyone was getting COVID and things were getting a little better, I was able to go to Alabama, spent a lot of time in the basement of the main branch of the Birmingham Library, got a lot of great stuff, a lot of microfilm on Bo Jackson high school articles and stuff like that. And then I was able to go to his old neighborhood in Bessemer and literally knock door to door. And one thing that's interesting, since we were talking geography, where he grew up isn't that different than Mahopac. It was very rural. It was minority. It was almost exclusively African American, whereas Mahopac was 99% white. So it was but like very rural, very wooded. His road wasn't all that different from my road. It wasn't paved. Mine was kind of badly paved. And I just walked door to door. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman. Do you remember? Knock, knock, knock. Hey. And the first guy I met was a guy named Symphony Adams. He was a 30-year guy. He lived on the end of his street and he was burning his trash in his yard when I showed up. And he just gave me a real good breakdown of Bessemer. So I wanted to travel more. That was the biggest part. But the good news, if there's good news of a global pandemic that killed so many people, was that everyone was home. Like when you called people, they were home. And I think people were a little more itching for human contact. So it was not as hard as usual to get people just to sit down and take an hour and talk.
Yeah, it makes some sense here. You say you interview a lot of people here. Who was your favorite interview? Who was somebody like who gave you like some of the most interesting stuff? Was somebody in Bessemer or one of Bo's teammates? Like what? Like who was the most fun to talk to?
I mean, there were many. I will say, like, he had a teammate at Auburn named Lionel James, and you're a little young for this, but he was a really, really good running back with the San Diego Chargers later. His nickname was Little Train, Lionel Little Train James, and he actually died in between me handing in the book and now. It's really sad. He was only 60, really nice guy, and he was awesome. He lived with Bo in college. They were friends. He had really good insights into him. He told me a story. I thought one thing that's really interesting, like, again, you grew up in Yorktown. I grew up in Mahopac. I grew up in Mahopac during an era. My best friend, who was African American, was one of two black kids in my grade. And there was a lot of racism back then, a lot of the N-word, and people, you'd hear this stuff. And when Bo Jackson went to Auburn, deep in the South in Alabama, the score was 99% white. Like I think it was 0.8 African American, maybe. And I had these long talks with Lionel James about what it was to be a black athlete at Auburn in the 80s. And he told me Bo Jackson's sophomore year, they were renovating the athletic dorm. So they put all the different players in trailers just for the year so they could live somewhere. They put them in trailers. And the coach of the Auburn football team pulled Lionel James and Bo Jackson aside and said, listen, I know you guys are dating white girls. I don't have a problem with it, but it's not going to go over well at the university. I'm going to give you a trailer that's pretty far off of campus. So you guys do what you want, live your lives. Just it's going to be away from campus. Like they literally, like, you were a black guy at Auburn, you were not allowed to date white women. Like it was frowned upon. And if you were a football player and you dated a white girl, you could do it, but it better be kept secret. And a lot of those things kind of reminded me of, I remember growing up in Mahopac in the 80s and like you would never, I remember my friend could not get a prom date. He was a handsome, smart kid who went to the Naval Academy, but he happened to be the black kid in the grade and he couldn't get a prom date. And some of that stuff really evoked feelings for me learning about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make some sense here. And obviously, one of my favorite parts in the book was going through all of like the Bo Jackson myths and like all of his like feats of athleticism. Like, what was your favorite one you uncovered you hadn't known about before you did the book?
All right, there too. Can I go too?
Sure.
He played a high school game against Fairfield High in Alabama. And all right, everyone kept telling me, man, he hit a ball and it went so high that by the time it came down, he was at third base. I heard that story. I was like, can I curse on your
Yeah,
podcast?
sure.
I was like, that's bullshit, right? That's bullshit. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. All right. I tracked down Eddie Scott, the left fielder for Fairfield High. He's like, yep. He's like, I was playing outfield. The ball was so high, I could not see the ball. It came down, it bounced on the grass. I look up, Bo is rounding third. Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
The other one is it's a first night game in the University of Georgia's baseball history. This is Bo's junior year. And they've been trying to get lights for years. Steve Weber, the coach, finally gets the lights. And Bo Jackson is booed mercilessly in the outfield for Auburn. And his first at bat, he grounds out, and the fans just boo him. They let him have it. First night game. Have you seen the movie The Natural?
I have.
So you know the famous scene, it hits the lights and explodes.
Yes.
All right. This is 29 days before The Natural comes out. Bo Jackson's second at bat, he hits a home run that hits the lights. Hits the lights. He runs back out to the outfield. I think he was playing right field. And the fans stand up and start bowing at him. These are Georgia fans bowing. His next two at bats, he hits two more home runs. And his last at bat, he doubles and everyone boos.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And there's no video of that game, but I interviewed so many people, Georgia players, Auburn players, spectators, media. I feel like I got a real good feel for it.
Yeah, I remember that game. I stuck out at me when I was reading the book here. Also, I want to go through some more specific stuff of Bo's life here. Start with like Bo as a kid, because obviously I think one of the big things I noticed when I was going through that section of the book was like how much the impact of him like not having his father be around, because his father, A.D. Adams, basically like is an absentee father. Like he gives like his mom Florence gives birth to Bo, and then A.D. Adams, he moves across town, starts a whole other family, another woman here, and like sort of see like the challenges Bo has. He's trying to like, his mom's working 3 jobs to keep things stabilized. He's like getting into fights just because people are making fun of his stutter, like all that crazy stuff with Bo. Talk about like what you found most interesting about his childhood.
First of all, Mike, I just want to say, and I really mean this, I do so many of these interviews where people don't read the book or don't know what they're talking about or ask open-ended questions. I just want to say sincerely, I really appreciate that you read the book. It actually means a lot to me. I just want you to know that. And it says something about you, just so you took the time.
Yeah.
It meant everything. It drove his life. It predetermined so much about him. Imagine you're Bo Jackson and you're being raised by a single mom. You're one of 11 kids. You're living in a house with 3 rooms. People are sleeping on floors. There's a wood burning furnace that you roll into sometimes at night, and you have burn marks on your arm. You don't have running water. You have to go to an outhouse on your property to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night with fly paper on top, tar paper on top to keep rain out. And your dad has no interest in you. Not only has no interest in you, like it's one thing to be abandoned by your father, which is a muff of a mind fuck. He lives across town with his own family and shows no interest in you and pops up every now and then, and that's it. Like that drove him. That made him. That drove him as a father. It drove him as an athlete. It drove him as a human being. Also, his mother was hardcore disciplinarian. And, there's one part where she like tied him to the bed and beat the shit out of him. There are other parts where it was basically in the South. I learned this from doing a book about Walter Payton years ago. During this time period, 50s, 60s, 70s, African-American families, rural South, the basic rule of thumb was for a parent to a kid who screwed up or made a mistake or disrespected them is pick what you want me to hit you with. A switch, which is a stick, the shower curtain rod, or an extension cord. Pick. And that's what he grew up with. And that's intense. And the other thing is his mom did not want him to play football. She was very adamant. So he didn't play football in junior high. He was a very late bloomer to football. And when he showed up those first few years, he played JV. He didn't just jump to varsity. He played JV. When people played with him are like, yeah, he was good, but he wasn't all world. And then all of a sudden he's on varsity and it just went.
Yeah, that's for sure. And speaking of like Bo's like talent as this pure athlete, it's like I related to this sense of like when I was like in high school, like I was like a kid was like just like really smart, didn't really have to like apply like studying as much to still get the good grades. Because like how Bo was with the sports. I mean, throughout his career, he's like, I hate practice. Like, he didn't really take time to learn the playbook as much, learn techniques or weight lift or anything like that. But like, he was just so good that he could basically walk on the field, like, be handed the ball and run for 60 yards at a touchdown, or like a crush a fastball for a homer here. So like, what do you think about like Bo's like just natural ability? Because like it's crazy to think like how much better he could have been if he actually did have like the motivation to like properly train or like learn on practices and formation stuff like that.
He was so preposterously naturally gifted. And he also was very savvy. Like he's a smart guy and he's a savvy guy. I mean, look at it. He basically, there was an entire marketing campaign based around him, and he barely said anything in the marketing campaign. Like he was savvy and he was smart and he had good people around him. He's still savvy and smart. He was bursting with athleticism. There's no other way to say it. He was bursting with, you can say God's gifts if you're religious. You can say just like this physical hand me down tools. But I mean, he never lifted weights. He hated football practice. He liked baseball practice. He hated track practice. He truly was an athlete who could show up and just be freaking special. And that's a generational thing. That really is. I think in the modern days, maybe Mike Trout has that, you know, maybe Lamar Jackson to a certain degree, but he doesn't have that strength. There's certain guys who just can show up and they're so far above gifted. And the interesting thing is, and it really is true, like I wrote a book about Walter Payton, and Walter Payton and Kobe Bryant's another guy. When you have a guy who is the most naturally gifted or one of the most naturally gifted athletes in the world, and he works his ass off, you get Kobe Bryant, you get Walter Payton. And it's in a way awe-inspiring to think about what Bo Jackson possibly could have been. But it's also possible this is as good as he could have been. And he was just so freakishly athletic that he hit the top ceiling anyway.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And you mentioned Bo like at Auburn here because like it's interesting like how like he's a kid like I've noticed him leaving the states, getting all these recruiting letters. He's like, I'm only staying in Alabama, and like 3-1 Abbott guides him there, and you see all the stuff he does with whether it's a football team, how they basically redesign the offense for him a little bit, how he just shows up after football team and runs track and is like winning meets in the SEC championships, and the baseball team. It's just nothing about all the stuff he was able to do at Auburn.
It's ridiculous. I mean, we should have known from high school, right? High school, he stole 90 out of 91 bases in his lifetime. Like that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. He set a national single season high school record with 20 home runs.
Yeah.
You know, like he was as good a defensive player on the line as he was a running back. He was their kicker. Like he was preposterous. He just was preposterous. And he shows up at Auburn. And at the time, there was a running back who wound up going to Oklahoma named Marcus Dupree, who everyone considered the greatest athlete of all time, blah, blah, blah. So Bo Jackson coming to Auburn was under the radar. And he shows up and he runs a 4.13 40 at 220 pounds. And it's like, how did y'all miss this guy? He's preposterous. He's ridiculous. He's different level. And everything he did at Auburn was just the things he did, jumping out of a pool in waist deep water, bending his knees, landing on the lip of the pool. You know, like, how do you do that? Home runs he hit off of people, walls he climbed, like just random. Someone said to me today, he really caught 6 flies in one hand. Like there was this moment where there are these flies around on a windowsill. And he says to a baseball teammate, watch this. I'm going to catch all 6 of them. And he takes his hand and he goes, and he opens up his fingers one by one, and the flies just fly out of the hand. He just was different level.
He absolutely was here. I also felt like when I was reading through some of his time at football at Auburn, like especially he's dealing with all these injuries in college, and like he was dealing with some nasty injuries too, and he kept getting these labels out. Bo is soft. Everyone wanted him to like say, oh, like Herschel Walker was better than him. Let's bring on this random kid from a D2 school to be in the Heisman campaign because he's
D3, Joe Dudek, D3, Plymouth State.
Yeah, Joe Dudek because he's not Bo. Like Bo was going through a lot, and I think between that and the stutter, this sort of made it hard for him to sort of communicate like what he's actually dealing with.
Yeah, and also in his defense, like, okay, so you're Herschel Walker, and Herschel Walker was amazing. He really was amazing. It actually makes me sad what's going on now because people forget how preposterous of an athlete he was and how much he meant to Georgia, which he really did. But like, if you said to Herschel Walker at the time, you have a bruised sternum or you have a concussion and you're seeing 5 things when you should be seeing 1, he would have played through it, right? And that would have been really stupid. Like that was really, we've learned from athletes how dumb it was that they were the machismo of football led a lot of people to multiple concussions, to debilitating injuries. Bo wasn't that guy. Bo would take himself out of game if he was hurt. And at the time in the 80s, we'd be like, oh, he's soft. He doesn't want it. And like, no, actually, he's savvy. He's smart. And he realizes he has a future. And like playing with internal bleeding, which he had in one game, is not wise. So these crusty old coaches who didn't really give a shit about their African-American athletes as long as they played would be slamming them. And Bo Jackson was savvy about it. And he did play hard and he did play hurt and he caught a lot of grief. And that whole, I mean, I remember it vividly. The Sports Illustrated cover, Bo Jackson's senior year. It said the thinking fans vote for the Heisman Trophy, and it had 3 pictures: Bo, Chuck Long, the Iowa quarterback, and Joe Dudek from Division III Plymouth State. And SI put a check next to Joe Dudek's face. And Dudek was a great Division III runner, a lovely guy. But if Bo Jackson had played Division III football, he would have run for 7,000 yards, probably more. It's a joke. And it really was. Look, let's praise the white scrappy guy, because the black gifted athlete wouldn't know work if it hit him in the face. And looking back, it's just really disgusting.
Yeah, it really was. I do want to touch about like now how Bo is going pro, because like we do see like, remember the closest debate we had in recent months, the Kyler Murray football or baseball thing is drafted by Oakland and chose to play football here. It's sort of the opposite with Bo, because Bo, like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back then were terrible, the #1 pick, and then we had this whole fiasco of Freeland Abbott basically agreeing to fly him on the Bucs plane to go for a physical, gets him completely ineligible at Auburn for his senior year, and like for baseball. And I sort of really just like kicked Bo off the point and said, you know what, like screw this. I'm gonna go play baseball right now. I don't want to play football. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and it's still up in the air whose fault that was. Like, I actually think, gun to head, that Freeland Abbott probably called the NCAA or called the SEC and said, is this okay? Because at the time, it was the same time as the NCAA basketball tournament. And supposedly the SEC offices were fairly empty. They sent all their officials to wherever the tournament was. And I could see some guy being like, yeah, that sounds good. Okay. And then them doing it, because Bo blamed 2 people. He blamed his agent, who he shouldn't have had anyway, because you weren't allowed to have an agent, but whatever. He blamed him, and he thought the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were trying to ruin his eligibility, so he couldn't play any more baseball. But that doesn't make any sense. Like, that makes no sense. That would be the dumbest move in the history of organized sports, that a team would say, he, if we ruin his baseball eligibility, he'll have to sign with us. Like, that's preposterous. So I think someone screwed up badly. And, you know, I think if none of that happens, Bo Jackson winds up a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I think they offer him a lot more money in baseball. They have the #1 pick. They have Steve Young at quarterback. He gets to stay in the South. I think he winds up with maybe even never playing baseball.
It does think it's interesting too, because like he talked in the book when he's going to have meetings with the players on the Bucs, and all of them are just saying, hey, like, go away, don't come here. Like, you want no part of this. So I thought that was also very funny.
Oh, Steve Young, who I interviewed for a book I wrote about the USFL, is one of my favorite people on earth. He's just great. And he told this story I'd never heard, where he's like, the owner of the Bucs was this old racist jackass named Hugh Culverhouse, and he wanted to woo Bo to Tampa. So he said to Steve Young, their young star, let's go to dinner or lunch and we'll take Bo and talk to him. So they're at lunch, and this is after the Buccaneers had flown him in. They gave him, he came out to meet different people. And they're at this restaurant, fancy restaurant, and Culverhouse is like, I'm going to excuse myself and leave you 2. And Bo leans into Steve Young and says, just so you know, there's no fucking way I'm signing with this team. And Steve Young's like, okay, my job is done here. I'm good. And they all knew he shouldn't. Like, Steve Young, wanted Bo Jackson as a teammate, but like, he knew there's no, like, you don't want to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer in the 1980s. It's not like now.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, Bo ends up getting picked in the 4th round by the Royals to play baseball. He has this whole unique contract negotiation with them, and where he's like guaranteed himself a promotion to the major leagues in September here. I did enjoy sort of the chapter on Memphis, where basically Memphis just used him as a marketing tool and just has him sign endless baseballs. And he sent poor clubhouse attendants after Bo. It's like, oh, you need this done, we need this done, this done. And Bo's trying to like play professional baseball. He's just getting bothered every 30 seconds or something new.
Wait, my favorite thing is he taught one of the clubhouse kids how to sign his name.
Yeah.
And they're like, right now there are thousands of people in Memphis with like Bo Jackson autographed balls in plastic casing. And it was actually signed by the clubhouse kid. Yeah. He hated his time in Memphis. He didn't dislike his teammates. He didn't dislike the city of Memphis. It's nice Southern. He's a Southern guy. It's a Southern city. He was cool with it. But the GM and the owner just milked him. George Lapidus just milked him and milked him and milked him and had him sign. And it really, I mean, shit hit the fan when the owner of the team set up an interview for his son's friend on the high school newspaper. And the son's friend shows up. Bo already said no. He said, I don't have time for this. But Lapidus just ignores him. And his son's friend shows up from like the whatever high school gazette. And Bo just is like, I hate to do this to you, kid, but I fucking told the owner I'm not doing this shit. And it just set him off. And understandably, you know, they just abused him. He was there to play baseball and get to the majors as quick as possible.
Yeah, one thing I also noticed of the baseball I sort of enjoyed was like the swagger Bo Jackson had, and now he's showing up to the Royals clubhouse, is acting like he's the hot guy on campus, and like the thing
Oh, he was
so hard. Like when he shows up the first day, he's dropping autographed Heisman photos on everybody's chairs. And the guys are like, "You've proven nothing to us here. Like, why are you leaving these things for us?"
It was some severely tone deaf nonsense. Like Willie Wilson and George Brett, guys who've been in the majors for a decade, don't want your autograph photo. Like it's not a cool move. And like it is funny. He brought them all. He started putting them on the chairs of the players. And Hal McRae, a veteran Royal, was following him around, taking him and throwing him in the air like this. And all the players started throwing him on the ground. He was super cocky and self-assured. And when he I mean, you read the book, his first game as a major leaguer, he's September 2nd. He's facing Steve Carton, one of the, you know, great pitchers of all time. Future Hall of Famer, comes in with 321 wins. If you watch the at bat, it's an ode to like youthful self-assurance versus an aged guy trying to hang on. I mean, Bo is like all but flexing at the plate. He takes his long stroll around the plate at one point. He hits a foul ball that's like this close to being a home run that flies over the pole. And he gets his first major league hit. First of all, it's a ground ball to second base that he beats out. He runs from home to first in 3.6 seconds, which is the second fastest recorded time in Major League history for a righty. The first was Mickey Mantle. And he's later admits he had no idea who Steve Carlton was. I never heard of the man. It's insane.
It absolutely is insane here. And then it's interesting because like he plays a couple years of the Royals, like starts getting himself in there. He's still getting a curveball to save his life, but he is so athletic gift. He's making a big difference here. And then he lets it be known, I think, he back channels to the Raiders, like, hey, I'm willing to play football. I want to play for the Raiders here. And that did not go over well with his teammates at the Royals.
No, especially when it came to a reality. They were pissed, and it was understandable. Number one, because like, who the hell are you? Like, we've already given you special treatment. You were called up before you should have been called up. Like, he wasn't major league ready when he came up. You were called up before you called up. You're making a lot more money than a lot of us who have been here a long time. They roll out the red carpet for you. They roll out the red carpet for your family. And now they're just going to let you play this violent sport too. And we can't even, we have clauses in our contract that say we can't, you know, windsurf or ride a motorcycle, and they're going to let you play in the NFL. That's insane. So a lot of the guys were really furious, and it got worse because his first NFL season was 87, and he really slumped in baseball toward the end of the 87 season. And they were just like, this is bullshit. Like, this is not right. And I don't think it's true, but they're like, he's distracted. He's focused on football. The tensions were raw.
Yeah, they absolutely were here. And just seeing Bo play football, especially with the Raiders, where Al Davis brings him in, basically, he's like, oh, this is the shiny new toy. He's all the speed that I want. He's basically trying to force the coaches to use him instead of Marcus Allen. So, like, that stuff was interesting as well, because obviously Bo's not practicing very well, but like when he's getting on field, he's doing ridiculous things like the 90-yard touchdown run in Seattle and bowling over Brian Bosworth in the end zone.
Oh, it's amazing. 91 yards. 91 yards.
Yeah.
Gotta be he was ridiculous. He just was a different level. You know, he just played baseball. He comes in, he barely knows a playbook. He's sleeping through meetings. And like, I mean, he showed up. One of the stories I love is he shows up. They asked him to run a 40 on grass in pads, and he runs a 4.17. Like, that's faster than Tyreek Hill's best 40. And he was probably 230 pounds at this point in pads. Like, he was a joke. And that Monday Night Football game is one of the definitive moments of my childhood, one of the definitive moments of Monday Night Football. It announced to the world that this guy was different. It announced to the world that, like, there's an athlete at a new level who has entered the stratosphere. 20 million people watched that game. It was just enormous. And also, like, not for nothing, being serious about this, the Raider uniforms were so cool and still are. It was just his marriage. Like, Bo Jackson, who looked like a Greek statue. He looked like the David in silver and black. it just was something unique.
It really was. Also unique was the whole Nike campaign for Bo Jackson, the Bo Nose deal, and they had the brilliant time of having it run during the '89 All-Star game right after he hits the home run, and like it comes up the fourth inning, I think again after he hits the double, and like it was this great commercial where Bo's playing every sport, and then they have Bo Diddley at the end talking about how Bo doesn't know Diddley how to play the guitar. Like that campaign is still probably one of the best campaigns I've ever seen. Like for Diddley.
Tell me something, because you're younger than me. Did you know Bo Knows? Like, if someone had said Bo Knows, would you have known it before this book?
I only knew it because I watched the Bo Jackson documentary a few years ago. And they talked about it there.
30 for 30. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, it was enormous. And it's funny. I mean, you read the book, like it's a 1989 All-Star game, as you said. The All-Star game at the time was an enormous national event. Like it wasn't just a baseball event. At the time, it was a national event. It was must-see TV. The players played hard. They wanted to win. And Tony La Russa is the manager of the AL. And he has a meeting with Bo and Wade Boggs, the Red Sox third baseman. And Wade Boggs ordinarily would have led off this game. And La Russa says, I think I'm going to lead off Bo, and you're going to bat second, just for the spectacle of the moment. And Nike has this new ad campaign about to come out, the Bo Knows campaign. In this case, they got a musician, Bo Diddley, to say at the end of this ad, Bo, you don't know Diddley. And they lined up all these marquee athletes. Michael Jordan's in it. John McEnroe's in it. Joan Benoit Samuelson, Jim Everett, Kirk Gibson. And they all say, Wayne Gretzky, Bo knows this, Bo knows that. And they're going to air this ad. And all the Nike executives are in New York watching the game at Mickey Mantle's restaurant. And they're really nervous and uptight. How is this going to go? Second pitch of the game, Bo Jackson hits his home run to dead center field. In the booth is Vince Scully and special guest Ronald Reagan, who was recently done as president. The sky is clear blue. The ball bounces on the black batter's eye. And just like there's this scrum, and this kid, a law student from BYU, grabs the ball and raises it in the air. And in New York, all the Nike people are hugging and screaming and clapping and cheering because they know they hit marketing gold.
Yeah, they absolutely did here. And it looks like he was going to be on track for all sorts of craziest things here. And the thing that sort of like sets this all in motion, that the downfall here is like the hip injury he has in the 1991 playoffs against the Bengals here, where the guy's tackling him and like his leg just plants in the ground. His hip really pops out. And then like, it's crazy to think about how far it come in modern medicine compared to 1991. Like this situation could have been so much different, so much better, like with the modern advanced technology. Like you might have actually salvaged more of Bo Jackson than we did after the fact.
Oh, definitely. I mean, he probably wouldn't have played football anymore, even nowadays with modern technology, but it's not 1,000,000% out of the question. It's just unlikely. He probably wouldn't have played football. But there are guys now like Andy Murray in tennis had a hip replacement and kept playing. And I talked to some modern surgeons who said, you know, he would have lost a tiny bit of speed, but not a ton. And when he showed up, to me, the saddest part for Bo Jackson is he shows up at spring training in 1992 with the White Sox, and he's limping along, and it's noticeable. And he actually lost a little because of deterioration in his hip. His one leg was actually shorter than his other, and he's kind of hobbling along. And there are moments when like he hit a ground ball to short against Detroit in a spring training game, and Cecil Fielder was playing first. And he actually waved his arms like, don't make the throw here, because Bo was barely running and he just didn't want to embarrass him. And there's nothing sadder. We've all seen videos of like Willie Mays playing center field for the Mets, or like not videos, but you know, old fat Babe Ruth wearing a I forgot what it was, but you know, a Brooklyn Dodgers hat at the end of his career, whatever. It's just sad. And this was really sad. And people thought this was how he was going to go out. And he actually had a replacement surgery, and came back and was the DH for the White Sox and played fairly well.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts to think about that. I also thought it was interesting that sort of the hip surgery seemed like a sort of like recentering in terms of Bo's attitude towards his teammates. I mean, there's an incident early in the book when he's like choking out Kevin Seitzer in Toronto, like when he's during BP because of the BP violation. But you see, basically, he's making bonds with his teammates now. It's sort of like reset, I think, Bo's mentality. It's like, oh, like I'm not going to be in this game forever. And like he's actually convinced himself more to training and doing stuff like that. I thought that was very interesting, is how this changed perspective.
I was talking to a friend of mine who played in it. This guy, Sean Green, who used to play for the Dodgers. And I've known Sean for many years. And he said to me recently something that stuck with me. He goes, we, meaning athletes, are all nicer after we retire because we just gain a perspective and we're not in the heat of it. And I think Bo got a lot nicer in that regard after the hip surgery, because all of a sudden he did have to lift weights, and all of a sudden he did have to swim in the pool, and all of a sudden he did have to ride the bike. And all of a sudden he knew what it was to have to make a team. He actually had to make the White Sox. It didn't all just come easily to him. He didn't just glide through it all. The endorsement deals weren't going to be the same. The attention wasn't going to be the same. So I think in many ways, number one, it humanized him. And number two, it's perhaps his greatest achievement. Coming back, playing on an artificial hip that would be the same exact model your grandma would have had in the 1990s, and being a legit major leaguer, not a great major leaguer, but a legit major leaguer, is otherworldly.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. Like, you think about the whole perspective of Bo Jackson's career. He's sort of like a supernova where he comes in white hot. He's a star of attention for like 4 or 5 years, and then he basically flames out, and then he just quietly goes into the night and lives his own life. He has no interest in sort of being the public guy and like bugging on talk shows or showing up at radios or being around like all these other alums and teammates. He's meant to be a family man at this point.
He didn't even, first of all, when he was playing, the teams never had his phone number.
Yeah.
They just like, he wouldn't give it to him. He was very sort of to himself. He wasn't going out chasing tail. He wasn't going out getting wasted. He was married. He was devoted to his wife, Linda. He had 3 kids. He was a good dad. Now he's a grandpa. It's so refreshing to me that you're not going to turn on a TV today and see Bo Jackson sitting across from Skip Bayless barking about how so-and-so athlete couldn't carry his jock. Like, you're not going to see that. He's not the guy who's going to say, Shohei Ohtani, what he's doing is no big deal. You should have seen what I did. Just pitching and hitting. Who cares? I'm playing. Like, he's not that guy. He's home in Illinois. He's a businessman. He shovels his driveway. He hunts. He drives his Ford truck. He raises his kids. He's a good husband. It's a great ending. It's the preferred ending.
Yeah, it's definitely the preferred ending. While I have you, I do want to ask you about like the whole winning time stuff because I am a big fan of the HBO show. I know they based it off your book. I do want to ask you while you're here, like, how did this end up happening? How did HBO come to you and say, we want to turn this book into a TV show?
It's crazy. I was living in New Rochelle at the time, so not far from where you were. And a guy calls me. He's a screenwriter named Jim Hecht. And his big credit, I do the IMDb page look, and his big credit is Ice Age 2, The Meltdown. And I'm like, this guy wants it, but he comes to my house and he's like, I just love the Lakers. I think this book could be something. I was wondering if you'd give me the rights to shop it around. And I said, all right. And nothing happens for years, nothing. Updates, but nothing. And then not that long ago, really, HBO. Oh no, I met with Adam McKay. Do you know who Adam McKay is?
Yes, the director.
Yeah. Adam McKay wants to meet with me and Jim Hecht. And I go to Adam McKay. I didn't know who he was. I had to Google Adam McKay. And I go to Adam McKay's house and he's great. He loves the book, blah, blah, blah. And HBO sends me a contract. And I'm still thinking, all right, but this is never going to happen. Like, this is all just, it's nice, but it's not going to happen. And then I start seeing, like, I think I read it. A friend of mine actually said, did you see like the Hollywood Reporter today? And I'm like, no, because I don't read that. And it's like Adrian Brody agrees to appear in an HBO series based on Laker book. And I'm like, whoa, that's my Laker book. And then it's Sally Field and then it's John C. Reilly. And now here I sit with a TV show. It's the craziest thing ever. Craziest thing to ever. If you told me Mail Pack High School, age 50, I'll be living in Southern California, a producer on a TV show based on my book. I didn't have that on my bingo card at all.
Yeah, what was your involvement with the show? Like, was Hex coming to you like every once in a while, like, oh, like we're thinking about doing this. Like, how do you feel like this would have gone? That you used to have involved like that way?
Oh yeah. So this season 2, I'm actually a producer on the show, and I don't actually know what that means, except I'm listed as a producer. They send me every script. I read them all. I give my thoughts. They ask me about casting. Like, they send me all the reels when they're casting new people, the demos. Who do you think? My wife, kids, and I were all in season 1. I think I'll be in season 2. Just little cameo things. And I go to set every once in a while. It's a freaking greatest thing ever. It truly is the greatest thing ever. It's like going to Hollywood camp. It's like if someone said to me, would you pay $5,000 and they're going to let you spend a day with all these movie stars on a set in Hollywood and you'll get to be in this show and you'll get a couple lines. Would you do it? And I'd be like, I might do that. And that's in my life now. Like, it's ridiculous. It's the coolest thing ever, man.
Yeah, I say I love the show. It's one of my favorite shows of the year. I watched the entire first season. I'm very excited for the second season here. Like, what was your favorite moment from the first season of the show? I got a couple I could think about.
My favorite scene. All right, well, there are 2. One, my wife is in the first episode, and you can see her. You would know because you know my wife. But in the first episode, there's the coin flip to see who gets the #1 pick.
Yes.
My wife is the Chicago Bulls secretary. So she is standing right over the shoulder of the Bulls guy. And at one point, you hear her laugh and you see her laugh. That's my wife. You wouldn't remember, but I'm just saying it's a favorite moment in our family. My favorite scene is, there's two. I love in the first episode when Magic is walking through his house in East Lansing and he goes, his mom says, magic is a devil word. And he goes, devil don't hoop like me, though. Like, I love that whole sequence. And then I love the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson press conference in Boston, where the guy who plays Larry Bird is so good. His name's Sean Patrick Small. He's the best. He spits into his can of, like, bud, and he's chewing tobacco. And he goes, can we just get this shit over with? And they walk in and they have this press conference. I love that. Why? What's yours?
Yeah, I think most two are pretty good. I love the open. I think it's episode 7 when John C. Reilly's in the forum as Jerry Buss, and they basically freeze everyone. He's talking and this monologue, all of that. I love that scene so much.
Yeah, so good. I mean, I have a daughter who's I have kids who are both teenagers. The opener to the one scene when he's with the woman in the restaurant and you see basically what he's doing to her with his fingers. I was like, it's a great scene. It's obviously a great scene. It's great TV. It's gripping. It tells you it's sexualized. Watching it with my kids, a little awkward.
Yeah, a little uncomfortable.
Little uncomfortable, but still okay.
Yeah, I also understand that HBO optioned the rights to your second Laker book on the Shaq, Kobe, Phil Jackson era here. Like, how do you think that would end up being shown? I was taking a different perspective now. I was given the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant a few years ago.
Yeah, I think #1, everything is a long shot in Hollywood, right? Like, you would need winning time to go a long time. And who the hell knows? You just never know. That's one thing I've learned out here. So just because they optioned it doesn't actually mean it's going to happen. It's all just like knock on wood. It'd be really fascinating. Like, because someone said to me the other day, how in the world would they ever cast Shaquille O'Neal? Like, how can you cast Shaq? And I would think that too. But then I saw how they casted Magic and Kareem, which is masterful, like just masterful. So I think they'd be able to. I do think it's a little more cautious of a dance because people out here in Southern California, Kobe is really a deity after his passing in particular, with good reason. And I think you would have to be careful. You could not. I think there'd be a lot of raw feelings if you went incredibly hard on Kobe.
Yeah, I get that sense as well. I also do feel like in terms of all the Laker products out there, I mean, they had their whole own produced documentary on Hulu about this, and Magic had his own thing. I think like this was definitely the most compelling of all of these things because like I feel like it's more real than those are, where they're basically giving their rosy picture of like what's going on with the Lakers.
Well, that's the thing about it all, really. And in a way that relates to Bo Jackson. Like, people will be like Bo put out a tweet not that long ago, and he's like, just if something's an unauthorized biography, I don't remember his exact words, but like it's just about the money and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, he's like, if you want to get the truth, here I am. And it's like, it doesn't actually work that way. Like, it really doesn't work that way because everyone telling their own stories is biased. That's just true. If you told me your story, you're not going to tell me about the time you wet your pants. You're going to tell me about the time you did something amazing. And if I tell you my story, I'm not going to tell you about all my fails, or I'm not going to highlight them. But the shortcomings, the failures, the hardships, those tell you so much about a person's character. They really do. And also, talking to someone's friends and classmates and teammates tells you so much. So seeing the Lakers sit there and tell their stories, it's great. I love it. I think they should do it. I give them all, like, you own it. You should do it. But like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's quote unquote the truth. It means it's your truth, the way you want to present it.
Absolutely. One last question I have here is obviously I'm a big Met fan, so obviously I'm a big fan of your '86 book on the bad guys one year, and this year this group got another big accolade because Keith Hernandez has his number retired here. So it makes us sort of like Bo Jackson as well, like that they're sort of a legend still. That '86 team, whereas like they had so many personalities, all these crazy things here. We had a documentary on them last year, and it's amazing about like that team, which won one championship, made the playoffs twice, is still so iconic in the sports world. So like what do you expect of seeing how this group has sort of remained relevant over the years?
Well, first of all, so you're talking about the like 4-part 30 for 30.
Yeah, that
And they put me in my backyard for 8 hours for that thing.
Yeah.
And I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was great. It touched every nostalgia point in my body. I loved everything about it. It was really good. I think they capture a time period, that team, really, really well. Like, nowadays there is no team in America in any sport that's professional where they're going to bring a keg into the clubhouse every game and just sit around and drink. They're not going to go out to bars. You know, they used to go to Finn McCool's on Long Island and they would sit there and they drink with the patrons. You can't do that anymore. You just can't do it. You're going to end up on Twitter 2 seconds after your first sip, you know, like you can't on Instagram and TikTok. You can't do it. They were smoking cigarettes in the clubhouse. You can't do it. In the dugout, you can't do it. They were badasses. They were just badasses, and they were raw and unfiltered and in many regards unlikable and dirty and nasty. I mean, to me, the story that sums them up that's in the book is Lenny Dykstra, who is one of my least favorite people in the world, but a fascinating character. He's he plays golf one day and he's with someone and there are a whole bunch of priests in the clubhouse, a golf clubhouse. And Dykstra goes, watch this, lifts his leg and farts in their direction. Like they were so vile, but vile makes for a great story and great characters. And they were amazing characters. That's why people still love them, you know?
Yeah, people still love them. People still love Bo Jackson. Again, the book here is The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson, written by my guest today, Jeff Pearlman. Jeff, thank you for all the time today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I could be following on social media. I want to keep up with some of your exploits, and I'm sure updates on whatever the next book's going to be.
Well, my wife would say don't follow me on Twitter, but if you do want to follow me on Twitter, at Jeff Pearlman, Jeff_Pearlman on Instagram, and you can go to my website, jeffpearlman.com. It's all good.